Hello, and welcome to The Realm of Ideas is Free to All. This is episode 36, The Loss of 2D Design. Okay, so this is my name is Bruce Gemmel. I'm at Art Science Complex. It's an organization run with Julie Rauer, who's basically going to be giving us quite a uh, more of her insight than I am. It's going to be interesting because I'm going to get a chance to kind of like listen to her analysis of this circumstance. So anyway, what we do here is a series of ruminations I have conducted regarding my feelings about my generative strategy and my ideas about regarding architecture and things in general. Anyway, I started doing this, and we're now on episode 36. I had started on another platform, basically left that platform, came over here, very happy with what we have. So let's kind of run through a kind of like brief introduction of what we did. We started with our first episode on, let's see, that was December, I think it is. Let me look back at my notes here. Usually have these out. Let's see. Here we go. All right, so first we started with, I remember the date was 1st of December 2024, the operation of the metaphor. What I did was I kind of started talking about one of the things I think was kind of basic to the way in which I approach design and organization of space, which will kind of tie in nicely with what we're going to talk about tonight, which is kind of like the operation of the metaphor and the idea of generating concepts from concepts, and looked at the fact that we often believe this to be a kind of like a literary or an artistic or a kind of language-based idea. But what I kind of realized over time was I did believe that when I first started thinking about and utilizing this concept, but then came to understand that it actually was a kind of there's an analogy in language. It's not kind of created in language, and it actually comes as kind of a result of kind of a natural process and progression. So then from there, I talked about three concepts. I talked about the organic metaphor, the artificial metaphor, and the unbreakable bonds, what I call proto-metaphor, which is a cultural sociological thing. So we talked about the idea of accretion and the kind of natural processes that lead us towards a kind of certain orientation, the fact that we see complexity come from simplicity. Second thing was we kind of came to understand in the second that there is this artificial, what I kind of adopted the language from Darwin and kind of separated the kind of like natural from the artificial, and then talked about ours as the artificial, kind of made some references to other kind of concepts. Then the third, which was the unbreakable bonds, or the proto-metaphor, which was, I believe, something that we kind of see culturally, also was talked about in terms of, in terms of kind of like in Adventures of Ideas by Whitehead, he kind of talks about certain circumstances that kind of allowed us to move, allowed to chart how other circumstances had allowed certain civilizations to kind of get to a certain point. But then he started to identify the process of that. The process was not something that allowed it to be a completely static thing. But anyway, it allowed us to mark certain kind of like valuable concepts, kind of like that could be of use, and that we could kind of see these things as valuable. From there, I talked about criticism, because I think that that is also kind of one of the operations. I feel there's three operations in the creation of kind of like the speculative arts, and I think one is drawing, the other is model building, and the third is criticism. I believe analysis is kind of like one of the kind of integral parts, and I think these three things all kind of work together to kind of allow us to kind of go to kind of find a cohesive thing. I think they're all necessary and linked, and kind of like not something that we can kind of separate. In fact, I remember I was at the Architectural Association, I think in 1990, when I was coming back from the Soviet Union after I spent time there, and I was on a panel discussion, and I remember kind of like defending criticism on as certain people were starting to kind of see it as something that really had kind of passed its age. And I said, like, this is not a kind of romanticism of a kind of bygone age, that the understanding of being able to have an analytical capacity was not just inherent but necessary. And well, actually, no, not just necessary but inherent. And I could go more into that, but anyway, from there I talked about the art of finding what needs to be said, where I talked about the value of the fact that there was a time when finding the most compelling and deepest insight was sought after and was the kind of thing that you kind of began to see as the thing which would determine the consequence of an individual. So we saw the fact that that was something that was valuable, so that we came to see that as the thing we sought after. So getting to the point where somebody kind of understood what was the most important thing that needed to be said. And that's the next one was the unbreakable bond. Oh, no, the next one was a view of criticism as an indicator of societal health. And it brought up two things. We not only talked about criticism, we all talked about the fact that unbreakable bonds were ways in which you could see the societal health. And that, like, what happens is that you not only understand the value of this concept, but you see how society is viewing this concept. Now, there are certain things that we've seen. We've seen the fact that, like, sometimes these unbreakable bonds get taken apart and kind of added and replaced by a better bond. But at the same time, there's ways to kind of chart a lack of societal health when something that is inherently valuable is mistreated. And that was one thing I kind of started to indicate with the idea of the unbreakable bond as regards criticism. As criticism is kind of an essential component of discourse, an essential component of basically allowing us to kind of deepen our understanding of things. Without analysis, without criticism, we kind of don't really have any other analytical tool that is as valuable as kind of like that could replace that. So the mistreatment of it, or the kind of way it's become a kind of derogatory term, was something that I kind of saw as kind of like, kind of needing of keeping an eye on, as it kind of like sought to kind of indicate concern. After that, I talked about architecture as a verb. Now I kind of say process, drawing, and then towards an organic architecture, which is what I've basically come to see the work that I do. But at the time, I kind of started to just kind of indicate what that might be. Next was called the authority of ideas, thoughts on the regards the indication of societal health. Then I talked about my past architecture, my recent past architecture, and the aftermath, organic design thinking, which we'll go into more in detail. But talked about my youth, my kind of like then I talked about my time at school and as a professor, and then later the post-professorial kind of days in which I kind of felt as if, like, architecture is going one way, I'm going another way. It's kind of like better to part company, and like we just kind of like, kind of like, see, we'll bet on each other. So you guys, you do your best, and I'll kind of do my best. Then after that, we talked about indicators of societal health, because we went back to one of the things that kind of reinforced why I felt there was reasons to kind of like move away from academia and move towards my own kind of like desire to kind of do what meant to me. So indicators of societal health, emotional attachment to ideas, understanding and judgments, what is an unbreakable bond, what are important unbreakable bonds, and the importance of unbreakable bonds. So there was a kind of list of all these things that kind of pretty much were the temperament behind my concerns, with the reason why I kind of moved into kind of more of an independent structure and felt as if, like, the academy was no longer of a benefit. And I also felt that at the same time, I kind of like lacked a real component of understanding in ways of which people build. So I kind of like didn't realize it at the time, but kind of sifting through, the academic into the kind of like the actual practice of building allowed me to kind of, and I probably should go back to that, kind of analyze that, because it was one of these things that was kind of like a haphazard, but kind of like valuable thing. And then it was just something that I kind of focused more on my own work, but never really thought about, was there anything I learned by kind of moving in this other direction? Probably should think about that. Then after that, I talked about, kind of more formative things in the kind of post professorial kind of, organic design thinking things. I kind of like went back to tradition and culture, force and rule and persuasion. Talked about the fact that, like, one of the things that was very important, two very important books for me. One was The Origin of Species, when I read when I was a student, kind of, go back to from time to time, kind of like at least once a week I'm looking at it. And the other one was kind of the discovery of Alfred North Whitehead and his work regarding process philosophy. So Adventures of Ideas has been a book that probably in the last 10 years has been something that I've kind of read, kind of like, in fact, here's my fairly, my war poor copy It started, I think the first book I read was The Aims of Education, which was kind of like a revolutionary thing for me. It kind of really opened my eyes in terms of the fact that, like, one has to be active in terms of an intuition and an adventure. And one of the things that I think is a really great line, as he talks about the fact that even in adventures of ideas, when you're kind of charting how these people got to this point by doing this thing, it gives you an overall understanding of certain requisites possibly, but the requisites are always in flux. And because the thing is, nothing, something can be temporarily stable, but it isn't inherently stable. So, with that said, I kind of talked about truth, beauty, love was something that I kind of took from a previous period, because actually in the 80s, when I was kind of a student, I had kind of found a tremendous amount of interest in the work of Ortega Gasset. And I remember reading and still reading um, The Revolt of the Masses, which was a very important book in terms of like understanding the idea of the kind of pathologies that kind of one had to be kind of reticent of. Anyway, from there, we went to two particular things. That was the 26 with the original 26, which I then had redone. I kind of thought initially, like, let's not bother with, kind of retooling that. Let's just go back through it to kind of get that foundation, and then we'll go from there. After that, I talked about entanglements and conditioning, and then I talked about measurements, which were the two component pieces that I see in terms of the engagements which I have within my own work. I feel as if there's an organic component in terms of the idea that there is something that I see in terms of an attempt to kind of at least analogize or kind of like generate an organism. And then the other one is basically simply just kind of the kind of the remnants of my work from earlier periods, which I kind of call mechanisms, and they kind of deal with kind of measurement, which is kind of like back to my original roots and things like kind of existential philosophy and surrealism and kind of like other kind of things that I felt had a kind of persecutorial nature, but kind of were very provocative and kind of very enjoyable in terms of the fact that they were things that fascinated me in my previous period, but they still kind of like do. But I feel as if there's the transition is kind of moving, that the fact that there's a schism in my work and the fact that both of these veins still exist. After that, I talked about understanding and judgment, the nature of perspective within the metaphor, and talking about the idea of the point of view as not just a kind of like spatial idea, but actually a kind of inherent idea, the fact that a metaphor is, because I've talked about the fact that is the metaphor predictable, and what makes the metaphor predictable is the fact that one can have every particular point of view on any combination of concepts generating a new concept. However, one is incapable as a finite individual to have limitless or infinite perspectives. So that was basically kind of talking about that. From there, we talked about understanding and judgment as regards authority, then the unbreakable bond of freedom and tolerance, value and consequence, critique of the present non-organic architecture. There was also, entanglement and conditioning was basically two pieces. Then last week we talked about honesty as relates to discourse, and I talked about the fact that this was also a kind of like concern in the fact that certain reasonable kind of operations are kind of easily destroyed without a certain integrity, sincerity, and honesty. So that's a kind of recap. Actually, I think the recaps are getting more thorough and better as I go along, because what I do is I'm starting to kind of see correlations between things that I wasn't necessarily kind of seeing when I did these things. Now, after this, next week we'll be talking about an American architecture, a truly organic impulse, our favorite organic impulse, and then organic design thinking, conditioning, and artifact, and the architecturally provocative artifact. So I think these are kind of going to be more specific things in terms of the specificity with which I work. But at this point, it's just basically kind of like, as we move along. So with that said, like I said earlier, what's different and interesting about this one is that this is going to be presented by Julie, because Julie has an interesting perspective on this particular topic. Now, I can see it from my point of view, my perspective as an architect and as a draftsman, but Julie's history kind of takes her right through the specifics of this particular engagement. Julie has an adventurous mind, maybe the most adventurous mind I've ever seen. But as a result, she started off and has always been a painter and a writer. However, her adventure at Cooper Union and at RISD first and then Cooper Union, was that she understood the fact that it was pointless to study. She can go more into detail, but it was pointless to study painting with painters, as the point was really to understand the principles and then basically build upon it in your own kind of like particular idiom. Because, it's like these things are so highly personal, but as a result, going through Cooper Union at a time when probably it was the last vestige of anyone really focusing on and really understanding the nature and importance of two-dimensional design. So, with that said, Julie, would you like to come in here and kind of give us the benefit of your wisdom on this, very highly important topic? Because as much as I don't think many people have spent enough time kind of identifying this or even knowing or kind of interesting this, that all the things that come after in terms of architecture, art, painting, drawing, etc., start with the basic understanding of 2D design. So let me stand up for a second.
I like my chair.
Yeah, but no one can see you.
Can you just swivel?
No, you just get up and sit in here. Can you, right?
Well,
just sit here.
Okay.
All right, well, do you want to sit there?
Yeah, I'm
Okay, all right, you sit there. Because I can't even see you in the screen.
I'm going to move over.
Okay, there you go. All right.
I like my chair better.
Tell us a little bit about, first, if you can, tell us a little bit about your exposure to two-dimensional design and how you basically understood it and what you feel is the importance of how it's kind of gone astray and kind of been lost.
Which part first?
Did you ever,
Well, the importance of two-dimensional design or graphic design is the communication of ideas. And ideas now are not being communicated well, thank you, or effectively, and certainly not in any kind of way that is aesthetically meaningful, aesthetically relevant, or I would say historically significant, meaning these ephemera, what's being made now, either in print, those few things that are still in print, or printed versions, things online are throwaway. No one even looks at the design. The design is meaningless to most people. Yet the ideas and the information is not being communicated well. I think most ideas are not visualized well, and the importance of two-dimensional design is the visualization of ideas, of concepts, of information. Whether it be a menu at a restaurant, a poster for an opera, a newspaper, a scientific journal, an advertisement for a bicycle, or as I say, a bicyclette, anything. I mean, even a label or tag, a program at a concert. I mean, these are vital things. The design of a t-shirt, even. I mean, this extends to everything. And most importantly, the book, which has so fallen by the wayside that a print-on-demand book, which we have ordered things from various sites, and what we've gotten back very often is not even a real book.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it's Xerox copies quickly stapled or bound together that are not even designed. They're just simply spit out of a Xerox.
Hmm.
And I can't stress this enough. When communicating ideas, it's not like a self-sealing stem bolt. It does not design itself. And, artificial intelligence is not a designer of ideas. It lassos ideas, it spits out ideas. It basically takes a tally of the most popular ideas, not the best ideas, not the most accurate, but the representation of these ideas is incredibly important.
Question.
Yeah.
So, in reference to AI,
Mhm.
in terms of taking the most popular answers, if all the answers have a fundamental flaw, the AI is not going to pick that up.
No.
Okay. All right. So if I look at basic principles like composition, color, typography, etc., how were you made to understand the importance or the basic nature of these principles, or these basics, these fundamental premises or aspects?
Well, okay, starting with the most fundamental structure, letter forms, which people used to give an awful lot of thought and consideration to, and should. I mean, this isn't something like a dinosaur. It's treated as if, I mean, when you talk to people about typography, they have no idea what I'm talking about. They don't even know what a typeface is. I mean, they cannot analyze even whether a typeface now is successful, unsuccessful, legible, illegible, articulate, whether it's even appropriate for the subject. And more than anything, a typeface and the selection of a set, and I say set because I designed art books for decades, large, beautiful coffee table art books for companies that a couple don't exist anymore, and the ones that do are not in any form I would ever work at.
And you won your share of awards doing that.
Thank
right?
you.
Right.
I did. Yeah. 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 And what is key is not just that these books are beautiful books, they absolutely are. They are worlds in and of themselves. And I can't stress this. When you look at the covers, you open up the covers, you enter the world of the subject matter. And if the book is well designed, even competently, you will be embraced by, and that world will embrace you. You open up a book now, nothing. There is no embracing of that world. The books now are as sterile, as monotone, as monochromatic, as bland. It doesn't, I mean, they should not be interchangeable. That's what I want to stress.
Okay. Let me ask, because I kind of like I said, I mean, for me, 2D design is the most fundamental example of the organization of information, as we've said.
Mhm.
So, I mean, before you can do organization of information or organization of activities or organization of anything, the orders and organizations of anything start with simple basics in 2 dimensions. You could even say it's a fundamental aspect of painting,
Mhm.
in the fact that like you're dealing with a 2 dimensional surface. So type, right,
Mhm.
which is something that we see more in books, but we do see it in art. One of the things I always found interesting was many cultures pride themselves on the beauty with which they write symbols and make letters. And the mechanics of which that was done, the way in which the ink, the way in which the ink flowed off the brush, the way in which the ink came out of the pen, these were fundamentally engaged in almost a cultural identity in the
Yeah.
way in which typefaces evolved.
Yeah.
So to take that and duplicate that in a digital format, where you really understand none of the physics, none of the graphics, none of the motions of the actual constructions,
Mm.
right? I mean, it's one thing to draw, to kind of model the way in which a brush moves. It's another thing to just use pixelation. And to
Yeah.
me, that just seems kind of completely disastrous. So talk to, if I know this is something you're passionate about, so talk to us about when you watch this, because you watch this in real time,
Yeah.
when you saw it starting to happen, when people basically what you would call bastardized all the typefaces.
Oh,
It took
yeah.
away their inner life.
Yes. Okay. Well, the way it started and the way it should still be, because it's more relevant now than it ever was, is with the sculpting of individual letter forms. To understand how a letter is made and constructed is everything about its phonetics, its life, its personality, its death, its interaction as a group. So when letter forms get together as a group, they aren't a faceless crowd. They're an articulate group that can only have a dialogue. And it's very, very different. It's not letter forms for the masses, it is letters for individual meaning, narratives, verse, stories, communications. So things like, and I will run these down because these are vital, and most people have no idea what I'm talking about: tracking, kerning, grayscales, ascenders, descenders, tabs, footnotes, front matter, back matter, indices, end papers. I mean, these are vital parts of the stage that is the story. And the story isn't just contained in one book, it's academic articles, it is layouts of images. And in laying things out in graphic design, you have color theory, which almost nobody knows anything about anymore. I mean, simply clicking a button on the computer and choosing a color that's not even going to be accurate, and I can't stress this, a color on a computer screen doesn't exist. It's not a tangible color, it's a generated color made to approximate what somebody thought this color might be. It's a programmed version of a real color. And they never match up twice. They don't relate. They're flat. They are lacking life. So, composition, color theory, margins, layout. I mean, these are all vital things that have been lost. And if you try to read a book now, I mean, for those of us who still do, the type is badly set. It's very unreadable, and it usually does not reflect the content in any way. It shows no understanding that the person or systems who designed this had ever read this book or even knew what it was about.
That's
Yeah,
interesting,
I mean,
because the thing is, what happens is, when books are written, they're written in the language of the culture. They're written in they're written in the face or faces of the culture. In fact, what's interesting is one of the things I notice is that we talk about different typefaces. Some typefaces were more inviting to the individual hand to engage in the kind of deliberate intention to embellish, or not embellish is the wrong word, but to create within the type. And then other ones were kind of less. But the point is, when all these things are just simply digitized, all that history is basically flattened and disappears.
Yeah.
I mean, and you might want to talk about, because I always found it fascinating when we talked about it, was the fact that at Cooper they had the art of the book.
Yeah.
And they're also, one of the things that we've watched over the years, because it was one of the places that understood the idea of composition, of color and typography. The Albers color studies, which was kind of something that was kind of really painstakingly kind of studied to a kind of level of kind of like almost super fitness, even is now kind of almost lost. And in fact, what we're talking about here, the reason for this is the fact that it's very subtle sometimes when things of a vital aspect kind of pass through our fingers and are sometimes lost forever. So, will we gain back this aspect of the value of kind of composition of organization on a two-dimensional surface?
I don't think so. In the
Neither do
way
I.
that we don't have stonemasons,
Hmm.
glass blowers,
Mhm.
people who know how to repair church windows. These should not be thought of as archaic callings.
Mm.
These are vital. I mean, there are still thousands and thousands of churches with stained glass
True.
windows in need of maintenance and repair. And there are also many people who actually want to keep that tradition alive and create new things
Within it.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
it's not a dead thing.
No,
I mean,
not at all.
fortunately,
Not tight.
fortunately, because of, kind of social progress and, the fact that we have lesbians, they'll always be welders.
That is
Because
true.
now it just seems that, like, for some, there's a
It's
connection
their
between,
calling.
it is their calling. I mean,
And they're really
softball,
good at it.
softball pitching and and welding is something that is very, very strong within the lesbian community. And I really appreciate that, because welding is also an art. And I think that, seeing the fact that this is something that'll kind of keep this alive. But
Okay.
some of these guild type things are very, very purposeful. But the thing is, we've gone away from the guild type structure. But at the same time, when we, what happens when people look at a Paul Klee painting and don't understand composition, don't understand the idea of kind of graphics, don't understand, the idea of color in basic ways. So what can they no longer see now?
Well, it's a good question, and I'm glad you brought up Paul Klee. He beat Joseph Albers by decades. He started the color theory.
Mm-hmm.
He started the diagrams.
Mm-hmm.
He started the color on color on color. That he did it in the 1920s,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
pretty much before anyone. He actually lectured on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think.
I mean, he actually had students that he showed it to.
I mean, I remember kind of like coming across the Albers, color studies, the interaction of color, and I found it like fascinating. I mean, I had never really understood what we would call the relativity of color. And if there's one thing that people probably don't understand, is color is incredibly rich in terms of its plasticity and incredibly relative. Someone thinks this blue is always the same blue no matter where it goes, and it's absolutely, undeniably, completely not true. And it's important.
Yes,
Go ahead.
I'd like to give a rundown of blue, and I can do this for every single shade of every single color. But I'd like everyone to actually understand what's at stake here, okay?
A point of blue.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. That's a Prussian blue that Bruce is pointing at.
And then there's a blue shadow underneath it.
Yes.
It's a cobalt.
I'm going to say why this is all important. Yes, that is nice.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say why this is important. Psychological associations. These colors will draw you to places that you're passionate about, people that you love, your finest meal, your best time, the absolute best of you is embodied in these hues. And what makes life rich are the subtle shadings of the palettes before your eyes.
Mm.
And I will say, these are not interchangeable. And the problem is, people now see them as interchangeable. that blue is not this blue. Okay. I mean, let's take
Wait,
an
here's,
example. Yeah.
here's another blue.
Oh, yeah. 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 Now, that blue is very interesting. It's created by texture as well as color. Now, I could get into that too. This is a mesh that is rolled up. And what does the texture do to the color? It makes it look like a column of captive clouds.
Hmm.
It gives it a very otherworldly look, a heavenly look.
Hmm.
We have a Stadler blue pencil. Not only is this instantly recognizable, excellent brand, I'll give them a plug. This combination of black and white band and blue, this is a sturdy blue. This is a serious blue. This is a scholarly blue. Then you go to something like a blueberry, and you get everything that's associated with summer and health and pies and romping in the glades and and a picnic. I mean, there are so many associations. There is the creepiness of the hospital blue, which I absolutely hate. So all blues are not created equal.
Right. And then
There's
we lead to the creation of palettes, which,
yeah.
honestly, given the fact that we talked about things like menus and books and things like that, we understand the fact that,
Yeah.
especially with seasons, I mean, again, your work as a painter, I think very much is informed by the palettes of the natures with which you generate. And you were talking before about the fact that when you step into a book, and I would say the same thing happens when you step into one of your paintings, you step into another world. I think in the work of great artists, that's what happened. You step into a new world, but the world has a palette, it has a structure. Part of that organization comes from the ability to kind of hold things together in their essence, fundamentally, two-dimensionally first. And at least if nothing else, it's all reducible to kind of the same principles in two dimensions.
Yes.
So if you lose that understanding, you can't really build upon it. It's kind of like we talk a lot about the fact that, like, if people paint but they don't know how to draw, and as a result it becomes a disaster. One of the worst things is to kind of look at people who have developed painting but really do not understand how to draw. So it becomes,
or color theory.
Well, exactly. So it
anything.
becomes a disaster because you realize what a person who has those fundamental principles can see that. I mean, one of the questions one of the things that we find out is that just the same way that people look upon that, they look upon the same thing about drawing. People say, like, well, why do you draw in the old, like people drew in, like they say things like the olden days?
I couldn't believe it.
No, I was asked that, and I said, like, what do you mean? It's like, well, you kind of, your drawings look like the drawings I would see from someone like Rubens or or Rembrandt or Leonardo, and of course, it's very flattering
because they're brilliant,
right? But the point is, like, there's systems of organization that are indispensable that we have not grown past. So, given that,
yeah, I'd like to give a few really quick, very important examples.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, blue in nature is very rare, which our viewers may or may not know. In fact, the cultivation of true blue flowers has been a pursuit that people have murdered each other over. I'm not making this up. So the pursuit of a blue tulip, a blue rose. I don't mean a sort of blue rose or a purple rose or a lavender. People have died to produce these flowers. People have murdered their colleagues. People have committed larceny and blackmail. So there's still really there is a plant. I believe it's called the pea plant, and it is Asian, used to make very blue rice, which is really beautiful. Oh, it's called the butterfly plant, and you can get it in some very upscale type places. It really is truly a cerulean blue. But in the Japanese world, the indigo blue is incredibly prized as a dye for clothing. And in fact, the best of the robes or casodes or kimonos are dyed this rich indigo blue, which took thousands of years of experimentation to master. But it has all sorts of cultural, associations. There are narratives, there are ghost stories, there are love stories. Whole dynasties rise and fall, and the colors of the shogunates are instantly recognizable, as are the crests, meaning that the colors form very, very strong emotional impressions on people. Think of flags, think of fascist flags, think of the Nazi flags, there are all sorts of things that have extremely strong connections to color.
Well, in fact, it's interesting, one of the things, that people, I kind of came across this, is that there's very little purple, and there had been very little, almost no purple throughout most of history, because it was like, I guess it was like some shell or something that had certain kind of purple. So purple was incredibly rare. It was kind of precious as gold. And only when they found other ways to get it, did it become more popular. But because historically it has kind of fallen behind, there's no flags, or very few, I think like one flag that has purple in it. But for the most part, purple has always been seen, and it's been associated with like wealth, wisdom, and kind of like royalty, because it's so rare and precious. It represents that idea of rare and precious, like genius, like wisdom, like royalty, like wealth. So it's always been associated because of its reality in history. So the subtle nature of this loss, kind of like Borges' piece about like what dies with every person, in terms of the, the idea of like the fact that certain things disappear, never to be seen again. And I think without this underpinning of these fundamental ideas, with the idea of no longer understanding why a type looks the way it does, or kind of how a color, understands its relationship relative to other things, or why composition kind of understands our perceptual kind of matrix in terms of how we kind of put that down, on a field. Without these things, it's kind of just, we lose the rigor of this organization, would you say?
Yes, I would say. I would also add to that, with the loss of people now even knowing how to write, even knowing how to form letters with their own hand. Typing on a keyboard is not a substitute for handwriting. And this isn't, a fire and a wheel thing. It's not atavistic, it's progressive. There have been numerous studies in Japan, actually, and I saw a show on this, with the loss of people now, people in their teens, people in their 30s even, don't know how to write. They have never written a sentence. They text and they type. They aren't typists either, because they aren't typing full sentences. They are abbreviating everything using emoticons, not ironically or paradoxically, but instead of fleshing out their own ideas. They cannot remember any of their ideas or anyone else's.
Interesting.
So committing letters, words, phrases, sentences to memory is how you learn structurally. It's how these engrams are actually imprinted in the brain. And they're finding that students forget a full, I think it was like 40 to 60% of what they're ostensibly learning in class or online, because they don't and can't write anything down. They regurgitate.
I see.
But they learn, absorb nothing, nor can they build on the knowledge, nor is it collected in their mind so they can invent from it, or leap off from it.
Wow.
They can't launch their own ideas because they can't remember anyone else's ideas.
It's interesting, because I guess because we draw,
Yes,
that's
we do.
fascinating. Because we draw, we've always understood
Twice a week. or more.
At least, yeah, probably every day
Yeah.
to some degree.
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
twice a week at the Met.
Yes,
But
yes. We are at the Met
but
twice a week.
for me, because of drawing, I always saw things as constructed. A
Mm.
drawing is constructed out of like thousands of lines. A piece of a building, a drawing of a building is constructed out of lines. A letter is
Mhm.
constructed out of lines.
That's your visual handwriting.
Exactly,
That is
exactly. And I
your
mean, handwriting is very much a kind of particular style that an
Mhm.
individual develops as they learn to draw. So, I mean, you can look at the handwriting of Velasquez as opposed to the handwriting of Van Gogh. I believe the most intricate and kind of accomplished handwriting ever in history is that of Van Gogh.
Absolutely.
Van Gogh's drawings and his inventiveness and his complete originality are just unprecedented.
They are.
I could look at Van Gogh's drawings forever.
And in a very important point,
Mm.
very few of Van Gogh's letters are words alone. Almost all of them
Mhm.
have images integrated. And I'm
Yeah.
going to bring up an important word now,
Uh.
integration of images and typography.
Well, I think maybe, and again, this is a unique perspective you have because you're both a writer and a painter. But again, I think for you, the image and the letter have always been intertwined.
Yes,
I mean,
they have.
and in fact, if you look at great times in the past, you kind of see the fact that like the construction of the image and the integration of the images with the words, with the characters, not only exist simultaneously, they almost kind of disappear that separation and become one conglomerate. One of the things you do beautifully is kind of mix the two into one so that the image and the letters become part of the same overall matrix that you kind of like, is that a letter or is that part of the kind of indication of uh, the the structure of the pieces.
Yes, and
I mean, again,
yes, yeah.
using the kind of like the interest in the biological sciences, a lot of these things have kind of repetitive forms like you would see in an alphabet. And in fact, you would kind of sometimes kind of say, oh, I can very much see where this could in itself create its own alphabet. Right. And I mean, in some
Yeah.
cases, I mean, you've invented many. I have alphabets simply based on, in fact, in every painting, you kind of, when your signature is generated, it's generated through the architecture of the structure of the pieces that you're painting from whatever biological kind of reference or metaphors you're kind of generating.
And the codex, the barnacles.
Oh, yeah, the Barnacle Codex.
I
Yeah.
invented a typeface for every one of 27 plates.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So there are 27 distinct typefaces.
Yeah, we have to get that published because, well,
Yeah,
I need to write the introduction
Yeah.
because, one of the things that's really cool is not just the plates themselves, but the evolution of the plates from that original one
Oh, true.
through to the end. Because, what we
Boy,
should
did
probably
they
do.
change. Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. So that, in a kind of sense,
Mhm.
almost creates its own anthology within the book itself.
Oh,
because
it's a
thing is,
narrative with it.
it is because there were definitely kind of pieces that had their kind of, there are links between some and some are more independent. But I think of that first one that has that kind of round orb-like piece,
Yeah.
which was very iconic.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when you went into some of the older kind of like more advanced pieces, the kind of inventions and the elaborations are just incredible. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So let's see.
A
We got.
key
Yeah. Go ahead.
A key point is to point out the failings of two-dimensional design now is that everything is being treated like it's interchangeable. And this is a main point. Because the people have no understanding. I mean, my job was basically eradicated, as were the jobs of senior graphic designers in the high-end book publishing industry. We were replaced by, $10 an hour part-time workers who had taken a 6-week night course in design. And they had gone from supermarket sales circulars to doing art books. Now, that was ludicrous beyond belief. And if you looked at I'll say this utter crap that was being turned out, nobody would want to buy the book. There would be no, I should say, no embracing of the book, no interest in the book, nothing to recommend the book aesthetically. I mean, they were really, hideous, embarrassments. But to treat one topic as if it's interchangeable with another is a real problem. I mean, I can't stress this. A designer needed to be, and still does need to be, very intellectual, very circumspect, very analytical about what they're doing. It's a very complex job. You are handed folders and folders of images, often not very good ones. You have to edit them. You actually have to alter them, change them, understand. You create the flow, you create the emphasis and the narrative. You are basically writing a play start to finish. You are making a movie start to finish. It's the same thing with type. You are creating an entire world start to finish. You're building a person. It's the same thing. You're making a standalone entity. For example, one of the books I designed at one of these art book houses was called The Story of American Toys. And the author was a very nice, very elderly man who knew the publisher and had thousands of photos in shoeboxes rotting in his attic. And I was led into a room with thousands of photos in hundreds of shoeboxes and told to make it into a beautiful coffee table book. Now, people don't understand true artistry in two-dimensional design makes a book. You put it together. You're building a human being. You are not only organizing it, you are making it into something that very often it's not. You are giving it qualities, style, substance, and aesthetics and meaning it very often does not intrinsically possess. I mean, I could go on, but we're running out of time.
No, I think
it's a very big
the fact
topic.
that no one noticed the loss was maybe because it had already kind of basically slipped through our fingers in general. I mean, I think that, one of the things that troubles me, we're talking about this tonight, when we're walking home from the Met, was the fact that, like, there's a concern that certain things, we're talking about, chamber music and, are going to be lost from our society, and they'll kind of like never return, because basically we kind of looking at the fact that the mismanagement of a lot of these institutions has gotten to the point where, aside from a very old and wealthy audience, there's no one, who's basically coming to replace them. And in the next 20 years, that audience will be gone.
Yes, I was the only one with brown hair, me and like two other people.
I always feel good at Chamber Music Society, because I feel like it's the only place. It's the only place where I kind of like don't stand out by being the only person with gray hair.
You were the only one without a hunchback.
I was the actually one that wasn't in a walker.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like I'm still ambulatory, and it's like
it's quite a doddering crowd.
Yeah, but the thing is, what happens is,
sadly,
we're losing the understanding of these vital things, and we kind of don't, if you're not trained to see them, you don't notice that they're gone. Now, again, part of that was the educational negligence and malfeasance to not make these things part of everyday understanding of culture. I mean, the ability to draw is essential, I believe, in anyone who understands the desire to kind of organize information. Understanding composition, color, and typography are many, and along with other principles, are very, very essential in terms of understanding the organization of information. The organization of information is what allows it to be communicable.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things you're saying is things just aren't communicable and nobody cares.
And no one can remember
Right.
anything, and
That
nothing.
was huge.
Yeah.
So the thing is, what happens is when people, because of their inability to draw and or write, cannot remember, is because we realize there's a tremendous correlation between ideas and the way in which they're organized and expressed. So it's if we lose the ability to draw, we may lose the ability to understand basic ideas.
Yeah.
And that's a terrifying
yes, it
thing.
is.
I wonder if this is, it's probably all, we should probably do another talk about that, because it's possible. I never thought about it, but it's like, it's terrifying.
Well, here's
We want to do a part 2 next week? We can move the other ones down. That's a good idea.
We should.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Have to, but
so let me get so what we'll do it. Let me just think of a title.
Sure.
All right.
Well,
It'll be
go
ahead.
Say before I forget. What is key is the qualities that a really excellent graphic designer had to have, and certainly does not have now, is you had to be incredibly analytical. You had to be incredibly organized. You had to be incredibly inventive and imaginative and creative. All those qualities that make for a fascinating person. And you could not make or design a fascinating project without being a fascinating person. I'm not saying everyone was a good designer back then. There were certainly people who were not. And they created pretty boring books and pretty dull, magazine articles and pretty unreadable things. But the idea is a book. There's a book I did called The Art of the Golden West. It's 340 pages long. It has an enormous trim size of 11 by 14 inches. The idea is you have to analyze what is going to make this book look like it is, Western art. How is this going to look like a Bierstadt painting, a Moran painting? These are in the American wing at the Met. These are also in the book I designed. How do you get the essence of an age, the essence of a time, the essence of an object into print? And how do you make that indelible in the mind of the reader? These are very important, tall orders, and very vital.
Okay. So so the thing is, we're looking at the consequence of losing the ability to comprehend ideas by not understanding drawing. And that's basically going to be the topic for next week. Is that your idea was the fact that because people can't understand the way in which information is organized, they can't comprehend the ideas. Okay, that'll be our topic for next week. So the consequence of losing the ability to comprehend ideas by not understanding drawing or organization of information on a two-dimensional surface. So this is the realm of ideas. And as we say at the end, the realm of ideas is free to all, and it's to the benefit of all for us to maintain this. Thank you.
Thank you.